Question 1 says to rewrite each expression in simplest form. So if you look at question 1a, that's the square root of 40. To write it in simplest form is essentially telling you that you need to try and take out as much as you can from underneath the square root sign. So you're going to look at that number 40 and think, are there any factors of 40 that I could actually find the square root of, and thus I can pull it out of the square root sign in order to simplify it. This is going to make it easier for you when you have this radical as part of a larger expression. You'll be able to simplify things more easily. So one way to do this is to look at the list of perfect squares on the right there, which is just think of them in your head, and think, are there any of those perfect squares that divide evenly into the number 40? And if you look at that, you can see that 4 will go evenly into 40, which means that 4 is a factor of 40. So we could rewrite this, instead of writing the square root of 40, you could write that as the square root of 4 times 10. And then using your properties of radicals, you can split that up. Anytime you have two things multiplied together underneath the radical sign, you can split it up and it would give you the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. And then we can actually find the square root of 4, which is 2. And then the square root of 10 is not a perfect square, so you would again look and see, is there one of those perfect squares that divides evenly into 10? And there isn't, so you would have to just leave that as the square root of 10, and this would be completely simplified into 2 square roots of 10. Another way to do this that you might have learned to do before is to do something called a factor tree. So with a factor tree, you take the number 40 and you're going to split it up into 2 factors. So you can pick any factors you like. I'm going to start with 4 times 10 because that might be the most obvious one, but it really doesn't matter what factors you start with. What you need to do is keep going until what you have left are perfect squares. So this 4, you can bring that up into 2 times 2. I'm sorry, not perfect squares, but prime numbers. So the 2 and the 2 are prime numbers. We can do this again with 10. You can write that as 2 times 5. The 2 and 5 are prime numbers. So once you have prime numbers at the end here, you can stop. And then you're going to look to see, okay, I want to now look for factor pairs, because when I have a factor pair like 2 times 2, that actually means that that is a perfect square. So if I have, you could, if you wanted to, write this out as a product of prime numbers, so it would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. And the 2 times 2 is 4, the square root of 4 is 2. So anytime you have a factor pair, and I like to circle them, that tells me I can pull that 2 out from underneath the square root sign. I don't have any other factor pairs, so whatever is left that is not part of a pair is going to stay underneath the square root sign, and I'm going to multiply those together. 2 times 5 is 10. You'll see that it gives us the same answer as what we had up here. So the way that you do this is a little bit of personal preference. Sometimes, especially if it's fairly small numbers, and this will be the easier method. If it's a larger number, it might be easier to do it this way. There's certain numbers that you're going to just get really used to simplifying, like the square root of 8 is 2 root 2. You'll just kind of start to memorize them as you end up using them a lot.